The quiet arrival. A man walks through steel doors into a world where reputation means survival, where weakness invites predation, and where every gesture communicates power or submission. Everyone expected him to crumble under the weight of institutional brutality. But what happened when this seemingly ordinary janitor revealed capabilities no one anticipated? Get ready for a story that will challenge everything you believe about strength, identity, and human resilience. If you're drawn to tales of unexpected transformation, subscribe now, because this journey will redefine your understanding of true power. The heavy doors of Riverbend Correctional Facility closed behind Marcus Chen with a finality that echoed through the intake processing room. At 53 years old, he moved with the careful economy of someone conserving energy for a long journey. The corrections officers processed him with bureaucratic efficiency, cataloging his possessions: a worn leather wallet, reading glasses with scratched lenses, and a photograph of mountains at sunrise. Chen, Marcus, embezzlement. 18 months. Officer Davidson read from the screen without inflection. His eyes briefly assessed the new arrival: average height, graying hair, unremarkable features that would disappear into any crowd. Another white-collar criminal who'd gotten sloppy with other people's money. Marcus accepted his prison uniform without comment, his expression neutral as institutional walls swallowed his civilian identity. The other inmates in processing watched with predatory attention, cataloging vulnerabilities and calculating social hierarchies. A middle-aged man convicted of financial crimes represented easy prey in the correctional ecosystem, someone who'd never navigated violence. "You'll be assigned to custodial services," Davidson continued, reviewing the work assignment. "Janitor duty, cell block maintenance, common areas, administrative offices. Report to Supervisor Williams tomorrow at 600 hours. The designation carried implicit meaning within prison culture. Janitors occupied the bottom tier of institutional labor, visible yet ignored, moving through spaces without commanding respect or fear. It was work assigned to those deemed harmless, incapable of more demanding responsibilities that might confer status. Marcus nodded once, accepting the assignment as he'd accepted everything else, with quiet acknowledgement that revealed nothing of his interior landscape. His hands, Davidson noted briefly, showed no tremor despite the circumstances. No nervous gestures, no fidgeting that might betray anxiety about his immediate future. "Cell assignment, D Block, Tier 2, Cell 17. Davidson concluded, signaling to another officer, "Thompson will escort you." As Marcus followed Officer Thompson through corridors painted institutional beige, he observed details with methodical attention: security camera positions, guard station locations. The rhythms of shift changes announced through distant voices and closing doors. Information flowed past him like water over stone, absorbed without obvious effort. D-Block greeted him with the particular acoustics of confined humanity, conversations echoing off concrete, the metallic percussion of cell doors, ventilation systems humming their monotonous song. Eyes tracked his progression down the tier, inmates assessing this new variable in their carefully balanced social equations. Cell 17 contained 2 bunks, a stainless steel toilet, and a narrow window reinforced with wire mesh. His cellmate, a muscular man in his 30s covered with elaborate tattoos, lounged on the lower bunk, radiating territorial confidence. "Upper bunk's yours, old man," the cellmate announced, not bothering to introduce himself. "Don't touch my stuff. Don't talk too much. We'll get along fine." Marcus set his bedding on the upper bunk without response, beginning the careful process of creating order within institutional chaos. His transformation had already begun, though no one yet recognized it. The janitor's domain. When everyone sees only what they expect to see, true observation becomes invisible. A man pushing a mop cart seems powerless, beneath notice. But what happens when that perceived weakness masks strategic awareness? Today's chapter reveals how the most overlooked positions offer the clearest view of hidden dynamics. Don't miss this exploration of perspective and power. Subscribe to continue this journey of unexpected revelation. Marcus began his custodial duties at dawn, when D-Block emerged from the artificial quiet of lockdown into the controlled chaos of morning routine. Supervisor Williams, a corrections employee who'd worked custodial services for 15 years, provided minimal instruction with the weary assumption that janitor work required no special intelligence. Carts in the storage closet, cleaning supplies, mops, gloves, everything's labeled. Start with the common areas, then move to administrative when the office is open at 8. You'll work alone most days. Stay out of trouble, stay out of conversations, do your job. Williams handed him an ID badge that granted access to non-secure areas. Questions? No, sir, Marcus replied, his tone neutral and respectful. The custodial cart became his mobile territory, a boundary that defined his presence without threatening anyone's established position. He moved through the prison's circulatory system like maintenance personnel everywhere, present but invisible, acknowledged only when something required cleaning. The common area housed television units, card tables, and weight equipment where inmates gathered during recreation periods. Marcus observed the social geography with the same methodical attention he'd given the facility's physical layout. Conversations flowed around him as though he existed in a separate dimension. Men discussing appeals, sharing commissary items, negotiating small trades that sustained the prison's informal economy. New Fish thinks he's gonna keep his head down, stay quiet, get out clean, someone muttered to his companion as Marcus mopped near their table. Give him 2 weeks before Rodriguez's crew tests him. White-collar types always break easy. Marcus continued his methodical pattern, the mop moving in efficient strokes that left no puddles, no streaks. Work performed with a precision that suggested deeper habits of discipline. His expression remained unchanged, offering no indication whether he'd heard or understood the prediction of his future. In the administrative corridor, he encountered a different ecosystem entirely. Corrections officers, counselors, and clerical staff moved with the brisk efficiency of people who left the facility each evening, whose identities weren't consumed by institutional identity. They noticed Marcus only to ensure he wasn't accessing areas beyond his clearance level. Make sure you knock before entering any offices, a young counselor named Patricia Morrison advised, her tone kind but distant. Some staff prefer privacy during sessions. Yes, ma'am, Marcus responded, meeting her eyes briefly with a clarity that made her pause. Something in his gaze suggested depths inconsistent with his assigned role. By midday, Marcus had mapped the facility's rhythms with sophisticated understanding. He knew which guards rotated through which stations, which inmates dominated which territories, where unofficial exchanges occurred beyond camera coverage. The information assembled itself into comprehensive patterns, though he demonstrated no obvious interest beyond completing his custodial responsibilities. During lunch period in the staff break room, a privilege extended to maintenance workers who ate separately from the general population, Marcus sat alone at a corner table, consuming his meal with focused attention. Officer Davidson entered, nodding briefly in Marcus's direction. How's the first day treating you, Chen? Well enough, sir. The work is straightforward. Davidson poured coffee, studying Marcus with renewed interest. Something about the janitor's composure seemed inconsistent with typical first-day anxiety. You seem pretty calm for someone adjusting to prison life. Most white-collar guys are basket cases their first week. Marcus considered his response carefully. I've found that accepting circumstances I cannot change allows me to focus on what I can control. The work itself is manageable. Practical philosophy, Davidson acknowledged, though something in Marcus's phrasing suggested education beyond what his file indicated. Keep that attitude. It'll serve you better than drama. As Marcus returned to his cart, he encountered his first direct challenge. 3 inmates blocked the corridor. Rodriguez's crew, as he'd heard them identified earlier. The leader, a heavily built man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, positioned himself directly in Marcus's path. Janitor, Rodriguez said, the word carrying contempt. You're gonna be real useful to us. Lots of ways a custodian can help his friends stay comfortable. We'll discuss arrangements later. Marcus met his gaze without aggression or fear, a neutrality that somehow communicated neither submission nor challenge. I'm here to complete my sentence quietly. I have no interest in complications. Rodriguez's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's what makes you perfect, old man. Think about it. The confrontation dissolved as officers approached, but Marcus understood the essential message. His position as janitor had made him visible to those who valued access and invisibility, qualities custodial workers provided. The test had begun. The first lesson. True strength reveals itself not through confrontation, but through response to pressure. When threats emerge from unexpected directions, how does wisdom navigate danger without escalating violence? This chapter explores the crucial moment when perception begins shifting, when the overlooked become visible. Stay with this journey. Subscribe now to witness strategic intelligence emerging from apparent powerlessness. The evening found Marcus in cell 17, organizing his minimal possessions with meticulous care. His cellmate, whose name he'd learned was Derek Paulson, watched with sardonic amusement from the lower bunk. "Rodriguez already got his hooks in you, huh?" Derek observed, scrolling through a contraband smartphone with casual confidence. "Saw him corner you in the corridor. You're gonna be his delivery boy. Packages, messages, whatever needs moving without drawing attention. Janitors are perfect for that." Marcus folded his extra uniform with precise creases. "I declined his offer." Derek's laughter held genuine surprise. "You declined Rodriguez? Man, you got no idea how things work here. You don't decline Rodriguez. You smile, you nod, you do what keeps you breathing." "I appreciate the advice," Marcus said quietly, climbing to his bunk. "But I've found that establishing boundaries early prevents larger problems later." "Boundaries," Derek repeated, shaking his head. "Old man, boundaries in here are what Rodriguez says they are. You just painted a target on yourself. Hope you got people on the outside who can pay for protection, because you're gonna need it." Marcus opened a book, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations he'd requested from the prison library. "I've been in challenging environments before. This situation isn't unique." Derek's attention sharpened. Something in the janitor's tone suggested experiences inconsistent with embezzlement charges. "What kind of challenging environments? You some kind of secret badass hiding behind that mop?" "No," Marcus replied, his eyes tracking across ancient Stoic philosophy. "Just someone who learned that panic creates more problems than it solves." The conversation ended as lights out approached, leaving Derek with uncomfortable questions about his seemingly ordinary cellmate. The following morning brought Marcus's second encounter with Rodriguez, this time in the administrative corridor where fewer inmates typically ventured. Rodriguez appeared with calculated timing, positioning himself near the supply closet where Marcus retrieved cleaning materials. "You had time to think about our conversation?" Rodriguez asked, his voice low and measured. The tone of someone accustomed to compliance. Marcus continued organizing supplies on his cart. "My answer remains unchanged. I'm here to complete my sentence without complications." Rodriguez moved closer, invading personal space with deliberate intent. "See, that's where you're confused, janitor. You think you got choices. You think because you're some educated money guy, prison rules don't apply to you. But in here, I'm the one who decides who has choices." "I understand your perspective," Marcus responded, meeting Rodriguez's eyes with calm directness. "However, I won't participate in activities that extend my sentence or compromise my release date. This isn't negotiable." The corridor's acoustics carried their voices. Several officers nearby could potentially overhear confrontations. Rodriguez recognized the strategic location Marcus had unconsciously or deliberately chosen for this conversation. "You're making a serious mistake," Rodriguez warned, his jaw tightening with controlled anger. "Nobody tells me no without consequences. You're gonna learn that lesson the hard way, old man." Marcus resumed his work without response, leaving Rodriguez to calculate his next move. The interaction hadn't escaped Officer Davidson's attention. He'd observed the exchange from his station, noting the unusual dynamic. Later that afternoon, Davidson pulled Marcus aside during his administrative rounds. "Rodriguez seems interested in you," Davidson observed, his tone carefully neutral. "That's usually bad news for new arrivals. You aware of who he is?" "I understand he has influence within the facility," Marcus replied, wringing out his mop with methodical thoroughness. "Influence is one word for it. Rodriguez runs most of the contraband trade in D Block. Phones, drugs, whatever people want and can pay for. He uses custodial workers, library aides, anyone with access to move things around. Saying no to him isn't smart survival strategy." Marcus paused, considering his words carefully. "Officer Davidson, I've spent my career making risk assessments. Sometimes the safe choice in the moment creates larger risks later. I'd rather face clear consequences now than complex entanglements that multiply over time. Davidson studied this unexpected analysis from a prison janitor. That's surprisingly sophisticated thinking. Most inmates just react without considering downstream effects. Fear makes people reactive, Marcus said quietly. I learned long ago that fear is just information about perceived risk, not a command to act against your principles. The statement carried weight beyond its simple delivery, leaving Davidson with renewed curiosity about Marcus Chen's background. The file indicated embezzlement from a small accounting firm, routine white-collar crime. But the man before him demonstrated cognitive patterns inconsistent with desperate financial fraud. That evening in the common area, tension manifested through silence rather than confrontation. Rodriguez's crew occupied their usual territory, but their attention fixed on Marcus with predatory patience. Other inmates recognized the dynamic, creating subtle distance. Nobody wanted proximity to someone marked for correction. Marcus maintained his custodial routine with unchanged composure, moving through his responsibilities as though unaware of focused hostility. His hands remained steady. His expression remained neutral. Whatever internal processing occurred left no external evidence. Derek confronted him upon return to their cell. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," Derek said flatly. "Rodriguez is planning something. Everybody knows it. You got maybe 24 hours before he makes an example of you." Marcus settled onto his bunk with his book. "What would you recommend?" "Apologize. Grovel if you have to. Tell him you misunderstood. You were scared. Whatever story keeps you breathing, pride ain't worth getting shanked over." "And if I don't?" Derek's frustration became visible. "Then you better know how to fight, old man. Because Rodriguez doesn't make empty threats, and nobody's gonna help you when it goes down." Marcus turned a page in his ancient text. "Thank you for the warning, I'll consider it carefully." The night passed without incident, but the facility's atmosphere had shifted. Marcus Chen had become visible in ways that typically preceded violence. Tomorrow would bring clarity. The breaking point. When violence seems inevitable, how does wisdom respond to aggression without surrendering principles? This chapter reveals the moment when hidden capabilities surface, when the overlooked demonstrate unexpected strength. You won't believe how this situation resolves. Subscribe now to witness transformation that challenges conventional understanding of power dynamics in confined spaces. The morning recreation period brought Marcus to the common area with his custodial cart. Maintaining his routine despite palpable tension, Rodriguez's crew had positioned themselves strategically, controlling sight lines and creating spaces beyond direct camera coverage. Other inmates scattered with practiced awareness. Recognizing imminent confrontation, Rodriguez approached with 3 associates, enough presence to establish dominance without triggering immediate officer intervention. They surrounded Marcus near the weight equipment, where blind spots and surveillance coverage created operational space. "Last chance, Janitor," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying to nearby witnesses. "You work for me, or you learn what happens to people who think they're special." Marcus set down his mop with careful precision, turning to face Rodriguez directly. His posture remained relaxed, non-threatening, yet something in his bearing suggested readiness rather than submission. "I've already explained my position," Marcus said quietly. "I won't compromise my release date for anyone's convenience. This includes yours." Rodriguez's face hardened. Wrong answer. The first associate moved quickly, grabbing Marcus's shoulder to spin him around, a setup for Rodriguez's follow-up strike. But the expected sequence collapsed into something entirely different. Marcus's response flowed with economy that suggested extensive training. He redirected the grabbing hand with minimal force, creating imbalance while simultaneously stepping inside the associate's reach. The movement wasn't flashy or aggressive, just perfectly calibrated physics that left the man stumbling backward into his companion's. Rodriguez's punch, already committed to where Marcus had been standing, found empty air. Marcus had shifted laterally with footwork that belonged to someone who'd spent years refining defensive patterns. "I don't want violence," Marcus said, his voice remaining level despite rapid movement. "Please don't continue this." But Rodriguez's pride couldn't accept the disruption. He advanced again, this time with 2 associates coordinating their approach. The common area's atmosphere crystallized into frozen attention. inmates recognizing something extraordinary unfolding. Marcus moved like water, finding paths through obstacles. He didn't strike or attack, only redirected aggressive energy with touch so precise it appeared almost gentle. Rodriguez found himself stumbling forward into his own associate. Another crew member's grab became leverage that rotated him off balance. Each defensive response demonstrated mastery so complete it made aggression appear clumsy. Within 15 seconds, 3 men lay on the ground, none seriously injured but all thoroughly disoriented by an encounter that defied their expectations. "Lockdown! Everyone down!" Officer Davidson's voice cut through the frozen moment, backup officers flooding the common area. Marcus immediately complied, kneeling with hands visible, his breathing barely elevated despite the confrontation. Rodriguez and his crew, still recovering from unexpected physics lessons, found themselves surrounded by corrections staff. "What happened here?" Davidson demanded, his attention shifting between the groups. Multiple inmates began speaking simultaneously, witnesses whose testimonies would establish narrative. But Rodriguez's pride prevented honest explanation. "Nothing, boss," Rodriguez muttered, pushing himself upright. "Just a misunderstanding. We're good." Davidson's skepticism was obvious, but without cooperative witnesses or visible injuries, the incident remained officially ambiguous. "Everyone back to cells while we review security footage. Chen, you're coming with me." Marcus followed Davidson to an administrative interview room, his expression maintaining the neutral composure that had characterized his entire incarceration. "That was the most interesting misunderstanding I've seen in 12 years, Davidson observed, reviewing digital footage on a tablet. "You want to explain how a 53-year-old accountant just handled 3 aggressive inmates without throwing a punch?" Marcus considered his response carefully. "I learned defensive techniques many years ago. Old habits persist." "Old habits," Davidson repeated, studying the footage in slow motion. "Those are extremely sophisticated old habits. Military training? Law enforcement?" "Neither. But I spent time in environments where conflict management was necessary." Davidson leaned back, reassessing everything he'd assumed about Marcus Chen. "Your file says embezzlement from a small accounting firm. But nothing in your file explains what I just witnessed. Who are you really?" "I'm exactly who my paperwork indicates," Marcus replied. "Someone who made financial mistakes and accepted consequences. The self-defense training is incidental to my conviction." "Incidental," Davidson said dryly. "Right. Well, here's the situation. Rodriguez just lost face badly in front of his crew and the general population. That makes you either the most dangerous target or the most protected inmate in D Block, depending on what happens next." "I didn't want this," Marcus said quietly. "I only wanted to complete my sentence peacefully." "Too late for peaceful. You just demonstrated capabilities that change the entire social equation. Rodriguez can't let this stand without response, but he also can't risk another public failure. That makes the situation unpredictable." Davidson paused, studying Marcus with professional assessment. "I'm recommending you for protective custody, administrative segregation until we can guarantee your safety." "I'd prefer to remain in general population," Marcus responded. "Segregation creates its own problems and extends institutional entanglements." "That's extremely unwise given current circumstances." "Perhaps. But I've found that running from difficult situations only postpones resolution. I'd rather address the situation directly than hide from consequences." Davidson recognized the futility of arguing with someone who'd already demonstrated uncommon resolve. "Against my better judgment, I'll note your preference, but understand, you're now on everyone's radar. That's dangerous territory." Marcus returned to D Block under escort, finding the entire tier transformed by morning's events. Inmates watched his progression with new recognition. The overlooked janitor had become someone requiring reassessment. Derek stood at their cell entrance, his expression mixing awe and concern. "What the hell are you?" Derek demanded once the cell door closed. "Nobody moves like that. Nobody handles Rodriguez's crew without breaking a sweat. You're not some accountant who got sloppy with numbers." Marcus began organizing his bunk with characteristic precision. "I'm someone who learned skills in another context, skills that proved useful today. Nothing more mysterious than that." "Bullshit. You moved like special forces, like someone who trained for years. Where did you really work before prison? What did you really do?" Marcus met Derek's eyes with quiet directness. I worked in challenging international environments where understanding violence was necessary for survival. I learned defensive systems from people who'd spent lifetimes refining them. When I returned to civilian life, I tried to build a normal career. I made mistakes, cut corners, got caught. The story isn't complicated, just someone failing to transition successfully. The explanation was simultaneously honest and incomplete, revealing essential truth while withholding comprehensive detail. Derek absorbed this carefully. International environments. You mean military contracting? Intelligence work? I mean, I've been in difficult places and learned difficult skills. The specifics don't matter now. The tier remained unusually quiet that evening, as though the facility itself was recalibrating around new information. Marcus Chen wasn't who anyone had assumed. That recognition rippled through informal networks, creating uncertainty where hierarchy had previously seemed fixed. Rodriguez faced his own reckoning with pride and strategy. He couldn't retaliate directly without risking another demonstration of Marcus's capabilities, but he also couldn't allow the challenge to stand without response. The solution required creativity beyond violence, a different form of power than physical confrontation. The game had only just begun. Shifting alliances. When hierarchies crack, new patterns emerge from unexpected sources. How does demonstrated capability reshape social dynamics in confined spaces? Today's chapter reveals the complex negotiations that follow visible strength, the careful dance between power and wisdom. Don't miss this exploration of transformation beyond violence. Subscribe to continue this remarkable journey of strategic intelligence and earned respect. The morning after the common area incident brought subtle but significant changes to D-Block's social geography. Marcus resumed his custodial duties with unchanged routine, but the space around him had transformed. Inmates who'd previously looked through him now tracked his movements with careful attention. Conversations paused as he approached, resuming only after he'd passed beyond comfortable earshot. Officer Davidson monitored these shifts with professional interest, recognizing that Marcus Chen had become a variable requiring new operational assessment. He pulled Marcus aside during administrative corridor maintenance. "You've created an interesting situation," Davidson observed. "Rodriguez is in a strategic bind. He can't attack you directly without risking another public failure, but he also can't appear weak by leaving your challenge unanswered. That means he'll look for indirect approaches, leverage you can't physically defend against." Marcus continued wiping down surfaces with methodical attention. "I anticipated that possibility. Indirect approaches typically involve information or resources rather than confrontation." "Exactly. Rodriguez has access to contraband networks. He could plant drugs in your cell, arrange for weapons to appear in your custodial cart, create scenarios that extend your sentence or put you in segregation. He has multiple options that don't require facing you directly. So the question becomes whether he views me as threat requiring elimination or resource requiring different negotiation," Marcus said thoughtfully. "My response yesterday demonstrated capability but not hostility. I didn't injure anyone, didn't escalate, only defended." Davidson nodded slowly. "You're thinking several moves ahead. That's unusual problem solving for someone supposedly panicking through their first week." "Panic serves no one," Marcus replied simply. "Clear assessment of dynamics, possible responses, likely outcomes. That's how you navigate complex systems." "Complex systems," Davidson repeated. "You keep using language that doesn't match your supposed background. Accountants generally don't think in terms of operational dynamics." Marcus met his gaze directly. "Perhaps that's why I failed at accounting. Wrong cognitive patterns for routine financial work." The exchange ended as Marcus returned to his cart, but Davidson's questions multiplied. Everything about Marcus Chen suggested experience far beyond what official records indicated. By afternoon recreation period, the first unexpected alliance emerged. An older inmate named Victor Reeves, someone who'd commanded respect through decades of incarceration without violent reputation, approached Marcus during his custodial rounds. "Walk with me," Reeves suggested, his tone making the request feel more like invitation than command. "I'd like a conversation away from ears." Marcus followed Reeves to a corner near the law library where camera coverage created less acoustic interference. Reeves studied him with eyes that had witnessed countless prison dynamics. You handled Rodriguez's crew with remarkable restraint, Reeves began. I saw the whole thing. You could have hurt those boys badly, but you chose not to. That demonstrates judgment rare in here. Most people either freeze or overreact. You did neither. I didn't want violence, Marcus replied honestly. I only wanted to establish boundaries. Boundaries, Reeves chuckled softly. Interesting word choice. Most people in here would say respect or fear or dominance. But you said boundaries, like you're negotiating a business relationship rather than surviving prison politics. Marcus recognized the sophisticated analysis beneath Reeves's words. You're observing that my approach seems inconsistent with typical survival strategies. More than that, I'm observing that you approach the situation like someone trained in conflict resolution at institutional levels. Military officers, diplomatic security, high-level corporate crisis management, those are the domains where people learn to navigate violence without escalating it. Reeves let the observation settle before continuing. I've been in here 22 years. I've seen every type of inmate. Gang members, white-collar criminals, violent offenders, politically connected defendants. You don't fit any standard category. Your file says embezzlement, but your behavior says something much more complex. My past doesn't change my current circumstances, Marcus said carefully. I'm serving time for financial crimes. Everything else is historical context. Historical context that's about to become very relevant, Reeves replied. Rodriguez is reaching out to external networks. He's investigating you. Real background, connections, vulnerabilities. Whatever he finds, he'll use for leverage. You need allies who can help navigate what's coming. Marcus considered this information thoughtfully. And you're offering alliance based on what assessment? Based on the calculation that you're someone worth investing in. You demonstrated physical capability without violence, analytical thinking under pressure, and principles that prevented you from taking easy paths. Those qualities are valuable in here, especially for someone like me who's built influence through intelligence rather than intimidation. What would this alliance require? Reeves smiled slightly. Information exchange. You help me understand dynamics in areas where your custodial access provides visibility. I help you navigate institutional politics and warn you about developing threats mutual benefit without compromising either party's principles. Marcus recognized sophisticated negotiation. Reeves was proposing collaboration that leveraged both their positions without requiring moral compromise. I'll consider your proposal. I need time to assess potential complications. Fair enough, but don't take too long. Rodriguez's research moves quickly, and you'll want established allies before whatever he finds becomes operational. The conversation ended, leaving Marcus with new variables to calculate. Reeves represented institutional wisdom accumulated over decades, knowledge about formal and informal systems that govern survival in confined spaces. That evening, Derek confronted Marcus with agitation that suggested external pressure. Rodriguez's people approached me, Derek announced as soon as their cell door closed. They want information about you, what you talk about, what you read, any details about your background. They're offering commissary credits, phone privileges, whatever I want in exchange for intelligence. Marcus settled onto his bunk calmly. And what did you tell them? I told them I'd think about it, Derek admitted, his discomfort visible. Man, I don't want to get caught between you and Rodriguez, but I also can't afford to make enemies. I got 3 more years in here, and I need those commissary privileges. I understand your position, Marcus said without judgment. You're navigating competing pressures with legitimate concerns about your own survival. Derek seemed surprised by the lack of accusation. You're not mad? I'm basically telling you I might sell information about you. You're telling me you're under pressure and evaluating options. That's honest communication, which I appreciate more than false loyalty. If you decide to provide information to Rodriguez, I'd ask only that you not fabricate details. Whatever you genuinely observe is fair reporting. You're a weird dude, Derek muttered, shaking his head. Most people would be threatening me right now, telling me what happens to snitches, but you're acting like we're colleagues discussing business strategy. Threats create resentment and unreliable behavior, Marcus explained. Honest acknowledgement of incentives creates predictable dynamics. I'd rather know where I stand than pretend everyone operates from pure principle. Derek absorbed this unusual perspective. So what's the play here? How do you handle Rodriguez investigating you? I continue doing exactly what I've been doing. My work, my routine, my principles. Whatever Rodriguez discovers about my background won't change my current circumstances. I made mistakes. I'm serving time. I'll leave when my sentence completes. There's no hidden weakness to exploit because I've already accepted my situation. But what if he finds something that could hurt you? Family, connections, something he could threaten? Marcus's expression showed the first hint of deeper emotion, carefully controlled but visible. I have no family requiring protection. I have no external connections vulnerable to institutional leverage. That's partially why I chose to serve my time quietly, rather than fighting charges or seeking reduction. I've already lost what mattered most. Prison is simply where I am now. The statement carried weight that made Derek uncomfortable. Recognition of losses beyond what legal consequences could inflict. "What did you lose?" Derek asked quietly. Marcus opened his book, signaling the conversation's end. "Things that can't be recovered through any negotiation or strategy, ancient history now." The tear settled into evening routines, but Marcus remained aware that multiple forces were now actively investigating his background. Whatever Rodriguez discovered would reshape dynamics yet again. The question was whether truth would prove stronger than speculation. The investigation. When secrets surface, they reveal not just information but the character of those who hold them. How does truth reshape prison dynamics when carefully guarded histories become public knowledge? This chapter exposes the moment when Marcus's past converges with his present, challenging every assumption made about the quiet janitor. Subscribe now. You won't believe the revelation that transforms everything the prison thought they knew. Rodriguez's investigation began with standard institutional intelligence gathering. His network included inmates with external connections, access to computers through work details, and relationships with visitors who could conduct research beyond prison walls. Within 48 hours, preliminary information began flowing back through secure channels. The first report came from an associate with computer lab access, someone who'd parlayed technical skills into valuable institutional position. He approached Rodriguez during afternoon recreation with printed pages concealed in a magazine. "Found something on your janitor," the associate reported, his voice low. "Guy's name is definitely Marcus Chen, 53 years old, convicted of embezzlement like his file says. But his history before the conviction is seriously weird. Lots of gaps, vague employment records, and some extremely strange references in old news archives." Rodriguez reviewed the printed pages with focused attention. Standard background information appeared first: birth records, early education, military service notation. But after his military discharge 25 years prior, Chen's history became fragmentary. "What kind of strange references?" Rodriguez demanded. "News articles from international papers, Hong Kong, Singapore, Jakarta, mentioning an American consultant named Marcus Chen who worked in security assessment for various corporations. Never detailed descriptions, just passing references and stories about corporate negotiations or facility protection. But here's where it gets interesting." The associate pointed to a particular article from 12 years earlier, a South China Morning Post piece about kidnapping prevention in Southeast Asian manufacturing operations. Marcus Chen appeared in a single photograph, standing at the edge of a press conference, identified only as corporate security consultant. "Corporate security," Rodriguez mused. "That's usually code for something more interesting. Military contractors, intelligence community connections, private sector enforcement. What else?" Nothing solid for about 8 years after that. Then he surfaces in the U.S., working for a small accounting firm in Portland. File says he handled international accounts for businesses with Asian operations. Worked there 5 years before the embezzlement charges. Rodriguez studied the timeline carefully. So we've got a guy with military background and mysterious international security work who suddenly becomes a small-town accountant and then steals money. That narrative doesn't connect logically. "Unless he needed to disappear for some reason," the associate suggested. "People with intelligence backgrounds sometimes go deep cover for witness protection or personal safety reasons. Maybe the accounting job was his way of vanishing into normal life. Or maybe he was running a longer con that finally caught up to him," Rodriguez countered. "Either way, this background explains why he handled my crew so efficiently. Military training plus field experience equals someone dangerous despite his age." The information circulated through D-Block's informal networks with remarkable speed. By evening, multiple inmates approached Rodriguez seeking confirmation about the janitor's hidden background. The revelation transformed Marcus from overlooked custodian into figure of substantial interest. Officer Davidson received his own report through official channels, a request he'd filed with facility administration to review Marcus Chen's complete pre-sentencing investigation. The PSY contained details not included in standard inmate files, including interviews with character references and investigation into his financial crimes. What Davidson discovered confirmed his suspicions while raising additional questions. Marcus's embezzlement had involved international wire transfers to accounts in 3 countries, sophisticated financial manipulation that suggested capabilities far beyond typical desperate fraud. But more intriguing was a sealed section of the report referencing sensitive prior employment that required clearance Davidson didn't possess. He brought his concerns to Warden Patricia Michaels during their weekly security briefing. "We have an unusual inmate who's becoming a significant variable in D-Block dynamics," Davidson explained, presenting his findings. "Marcus Chen. File says embezzlement, but his behavior and background suggest intelligence community or high-level corporate security experience. He demonstrated advanced defensive capabilities during a confrontation, and now Rodriguez is actively investigating him." Warden Michaels reviewed the PSY's available sections with practiced attention. "Sealed employment history is unusual, but not unprecedented. Could be witness protection, could be classified government work, could be sensitive corporate positions with non-disclosure requirements. Unless we have security concerns requiring disclosure, that information remains protected. My concern is that whatever Rodriguez discovers could create dangerous dynamics. If Chen has connections to organized crime, intelligence services, or other networks, we need to know before situations develop beyond our control." Michaels considered this carefully. "I'll make inquiries through appropriate channels, but unless Chen poses immediate threat, his background remains his private history. Continue monitoring the situation and report any escalation." Davidson left the meeting unsatisfied but constrained by protocols. Whatever Marcus Chen's real history contained, official channels wouldn't reveal it without justification beyond curiosity. That evening, Marcus found himself summoned to an informal gathering in Victor Reeves's cell, a meeting that represented significant development in institutional politics. Reeves had assembled 5 other influential inmates, each representing different factions within D-Block's complex social ecosystem. "Thank you for joining us," Reeves began, his tone formal despite the setting's informality. "We've reached a critical juncture regarding your situation, and I thought coordinated communication would serve everyone's interests." Marcus remained standing near the cell entrance, his posture relaxed but attentive. "I'm listening." Reeves gestured to the assembled group. "You've met Rodriguez's investigation with remarkable composure. Most people would panic when their background becomes subject to institutional scrutiny, but you seem almost unconcerned, which suggests either extraordinary confidence or information we're lacking." "I'm unconcerned because there's nothing in my background that changes my current situation," Marcus replied calmly. "Whatever Rodriguez discovers, it remains historical context rather than operational leverage." One of the other inmates, a former gang leader named Thomas who'd maintained influence through strategic thinking, spoke up. "Rodriguez found references to your security work in Southeast Asia. That usually means military contracting, corporate enforcement, or intelligence community connections. Those backgrounds create very specific vulnerabilities and very specific capabilities. We need to understand which category you represent." Marcus recognized the sophisticated analysis beneath the question. These weren't simple criminals. They were individuals who'd developed advanced strategic thinking through decades of navigating complex institutional environments. "I worked in corporate security assessing risks for international manufacturing operations," Marcus explained, choosing his words carefully. "I trained local security personnel, evaluated facility vulnerabilities, and advised companies on threat mitigation. It was legitimate consulting work that required understanding violence without necessarily engaging in it." "But you clearly have combat training," Thomas countered. "What you did to Rodriguez's crew wasn't improvised self-defense. That was advanced defensive systems taught to people expecting serious violence." I learned those skills during military service and refined them through necessity in environments where threats existed. But my work was primarily analytical, understanding systems, identifying vulnerabilities, developing protective strategies. The physical capabilities were insurance rather than primary function. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. So you're telling us you were the person corporations called when they needed sophisticated threat assessment in dangerous regions. That's extremely specialized work that requires unique combinations of skills: analytical thinking, cultural understanding, combat capability, and political sophistication. That accurately describes what I did, Marcus confirmed. And you walked away from that to become a small-town accountant? Another inmate asked skeptically. That's a dramatic career downgrade that doesn't make logical sense unless something forced the transition. Marcus's expression showed carefully controlled emotion. I walked away because continuing that work cost me things I valued more than professional success. I tried to build normal life, made serious mistakes in that transition, and ended up here. The story is simultaneously that simple and that complicated. The cell fell quiet as the assembled inmates processed this information. Marcus had essentially confirmed sophisticated background while refusing to elaborate on specifics. Transparency regarding capabilities, without vulnerability regarding motivations. Rodriguez won't be satisfied with vague acknowledgement, Reeves warned. He'll push for details he can weaponize, and if you don't provide them, he'll fabricate narratives that serve his interests. I understand that risk, Marcus replied. But I won't provide information that creates additional complications simply to satisfy curiosity. My past is my past. My focus remains completing my sentence without unnecessary drama. Thomas leaned forward. Here's the situation from our perspective. You've demonstrated capabilities that make you valuable potential ally or dangerous potential enemy. Rodriguez needs to re-establish dominance after his public failure, which means he'll create situation forcing you to choose sides. We're offering third option, coalition of institutional stability where your skills serve broader interests rather than individual power plays. Marcus recognized sophisticated recruitment. These men were proposing alliance based on mutual interests rather than dominance or submission. What would this coalition require from me? Information about administrative operations that your custodial access reveals assessment of security vulnerabilities we might leverage for operational advantages. Strategic thinking about how to navigate changing institutional dynamics as Rodriguez's influence faces new challenges. And in exchange? Protection from Rodriguez's retaliation, access to resources that make incarceration more comfortable, and connections that could prove valuable upon your release. We're offering functional partnership rather than exploitative arrangement. Marcus considered the proposal carefully, recognizing both opportunities and risks. I need time to evaluate this. I don't make strategic commitments without thorough consideration. Fair enough, Reeves acknowledged. But time isn't unlimited resource. Rodriguez is planning something, and you'll want established allies before his next move materializes. Marcus returned to his cell, finding Derek anxious and agitated. Rodriguez's people are pushing harder for information, Derek reported immediately. They're offering serious incentives, protection, commissary privileges, even help with my appeal. But they're also implying consequences if I don't cooperate. I need to know what I'm getting into before I make final decisions. Marcus climbed to his bunk, his expression thoughtful. Derek, I'm going to tell you something that will help you make informed choice. My background before prison involved security consulting in challenging international environments. I have training and experience that explains my capabilities. Rodriguez will discover this information regardless of what you report. So if cooperating with him makes your situation more manageable, I don't object to you sharing what you observe. Derek stared at him with mixture of surprise and confusion. You're just telling me this, knowing I might report it to Rodriguez? I'm telling you because withholding information creates false mystique that generates more problems than truth. Yes, I have unusual background. Yes, I have capabilities beyond typical inmate. But those facts don't change my current circumstances or create vulnerabilities Rodriguez can exploit. So share what you need to share without guilt. Man, Derek said quietly. You're either the most confident person I've ever met, or you're setting up something I don't understand yet. Marcus opened his book, offering a slight smile. Perhaps both. Or perhaps I've simply learned that trying to control information flow creates exhausting complexity. Truth, strategically shared, often proves simpler than elaborate deception. As D-blocks settled into evening quiet, multiple forces were now positioning themselves around Marcus Chen's revealed history. What would emerge from these converging interests remained uncertain. But Marcus's transformation from overlooked janitor to strategic variable was now complete. The proposition: when power recognizes power, negotiation replaces confrontation. How do former adversaries find common ground when mutual respect emerges from conflict? Today's chapter reveals the unexpected conversation that could reshape D-Block's entire social structure. Don't miss this turning point where wisdom proves more valuable than dominance. Subscribe now to witness strategic alliance emerging from apparent opposition. The morning brought Marcus to the administrative corridor where Warden Michaels requested his presence, an unusual summons that indicated official attention beyond routine custodial oversight. Officer Davidson escorted him to the warden's office, his expression suggesting complicated developments. Warden Michaels gestured to a chair across from her desk, her manner professional but less formal than typical administrative interactions. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming. I've been reviewing your file and recent incident reports with increasing interest. You've become quite the topic of institutional conversation." "I apologize if my presence has created complications," Marcus replied respectfully. "I've attempted to maintain low profile while completing my sentence." "Attempted and failed, apparently," Michaels observed with slight amusement. "Your response to Rodriguez's crew was impressive from tactical perspective, though it's created ripple effects throughout D-Block's social dynamics. More interestingly, inquiries into your background have revealed sealed employment history that multiple government agencies declined to discuss with me." Marcus remained silent, recognizing that response wasn't required yet. "Which tells me," Michaels continued, "that you're not typical white-collar criminal who panicked and embezzled money. You're someone with specialized background who made calculated decisions that led to incarceration. That distinction matters for how I manage your presence here." "My past employment doesn't change my current status," Marcus said carefully. "I committed financial crimes, accepted conviction, and am serving my time according to legal requirements." "True. But your capabilities and institutional influence are creating dynamics requiring careful management. Rodriguez is planning some form of response to his lost face. Reeves is building coalition around you. Other factions are reassessing their positions based on your demonstrated skills. You've become central figure in power structure that was previously more stable. What would you have me do differently, Warden?" Michaels leaned back, studying him thoughtfully. "I'd like you to consider work assignment change. We have consulting position available in our institutional safety review, assessing facility vulnerabilities, recommending security improvements, working with staff on threat mitigation. Your background makes you uniquely qualified, and the position would remove you from general population dynamics." Marcus recognized both opportunity and complication in the offer. "That position would further distinguish me from other inmates while creating perception that I'm receiving special treatment. It might resolve immediate tensions but generate new resentments." "Your concern is political sophistication rather than personal advantage," Michaels noted approvingly. "Most inmates would jump at opportunity for better work detail without considering broader implications." "I've learned that short-term solutions often create long-term complications," Marcus replied. "I appreciate the offer, but I'd prefer to maintain my current assignment unless you determine my presence in custodial services creates unmanageable risks." "You're declining preferential work assignment to avoid disrupting social dynamics," Michaels said, her tone suggesting respect for the reasoning. "That's remarkably selfless for someone serving time." "Not selfless, strategic. Creating resentment among inmates I'll interact with for 18 months serves no one's interests. I'd rather navigate existing tensions than generate new ones through perceived favoritism." Michaels nodded slowly. "I'll respect your preference, but understand that my offer remains available if circumstances change. In meantime, be aware that we're monitoring Rodriguez's activities closely. If his response escalates beyond institutional tolerance, we'll intervene regardless of political fallout." The meeting concluded with mutual understanding. Marcus would continue his custodial duties under heightened administrative awareness. As Davidson escorted him back to D Block, the officer provided additional context. The warden doesn't offer consulting positions to convicted felons without serious consideration, Davidson observed. Whatever your sealed background contains, it impressed people who don't impress easily. You could have taken an easier path, but you chose principle over comfort. That's rare in here. Easier paths often lead to harder destinations, Marcus replied simply. By afternoon recreation period, the facility's attention focused on unexpected development. Rodriguez approached Marcus directly during custodial rounds, but his demeanor had shifted from aggressive dominance to calculated negotiation. "We need to talk," Rodriguez stated, his tone stripped of previous hostility. "Privately, if possible." Marcus recognized significant strategic pivot. Rodriguez had moved from confrontation to conversation. "I'm willing to listen. Where would you suggest?" "Law library has empty study room during this period. 20 minutes, just us, no crews on either side." Marcus agreed with slight nod, understanding that this meeting represented critical juncture in their relationship. He informed Officer Davidson of the conversation, ensuring supervision knew about the private meeting, transparency that protected both parties. The law library's study room provided neutral territory, its glass walls offering visibility while allowing confidential conversation. Rodriguez entered with body language notably different from their previous encounters, still projecting confidence, but without aggressive posturing. "I'm going to be direct," Rodriguez began, settling into chair across from Marcus. "I underestimated you completely. My crew underestimated you. Pretty much everyone in D Block underestimated you. That was my mistake, and it cost me face an environment where reputation determines survival." Marcus remained silent, allowing Rodriguez to establish his own narrative. "Since then, I've learned about your background, the military service, the international security work, the capabilities that explain how you handled 3 guys without breaking a sweat. That information changes my entire assessment of you and our situation." "How so?" Marcus asked neutrally. Rodriguez leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I recognize that you're not weak prey to exploit or enemy to eliminate. You're a professional who handled confrontation with remarkable restraint. You could have seriously hurt my crew. Broken bones, permanent damage. But you chose not to, even though it would have made stronger statement. That restraint tells me you operate according to principles, rather than just survival instincts." "I've never wanted conflict," Marcus confirmed. "I only wanted to establish boundaries that allowed me to serve my time without compromise. And I respect that now, even though I couldn't see it before pride got in the way. So here's my proposition. We call formal truce and explore whether we might actually be useful to each other, rather than working at cross purposes." Marcus studied Rodriguez carefully, recognizing sophisticated strategic thinking beneath the proposal. What form would this utility take? "I run operations that require sophisticated coordination and institutional knowledge," Rodriguez explained. "Most of my crew are loyal but not particularly strategic. They handle logistics and enforcement, but they don't think several moves ahead or understand complex systems. You clearly do both." "You're suggesting I provide strategic consultation for your contraband operations," Marcus stated directly. "I'm suggesting we explore whether mutually beneficial arrangement exists. You have analytical capabilities and institutional access through your custodial position. I have resources and protection network that could make your remaining time significantly more comfortable. We might find ways to collaborate without compromising your principles." Marcus considered this carefully. "What specific collaboration are you proposing?" Rodriguez relaxed slightly, recognizing genuine engagement rather than reflexive rejection. "Start with information exchange. You observe institutional patterns through your work, guard rotations, surveillance blind spots, procedural vulnerabilities. That information has value for my operations. In exchange, I ensure you have access to amenities that make incarceration more tolerable, better commissary items, privacy when needed, protection from other potential threats. Without requiring me to actively participate in contraband distribution or other activities that could extend my sentence," Marcus clarified. "Exactly. You provide strategic intelligence. I provide environmental improvements, clean exchange that doesn't compromise your release date." Marcus remained quiet, processing the proposition's implications. Rodriguez was essentially offering what Reeves's coalition had proposed, alliance based on mutual benefit rather than dominance. The key distinction was Rodriguez's particular resources and risk tolerance. "I appreciate the straightforward proposition," Marcus finally responded. "But I need to understand your motivations beyond immediate tactical advantage. Why this approach rather than continued opposition?" Rodriguez smiled slightly, acknowledging the sophisticated question. "Because I learned important lesson from our confrontation. Power in here comes from control over resources, information, people's behavior. I tried to control you through intimidation, and that failed badly. Now I'm trying different approach based on recognition that you're someone worth having as ally rather than enemy. Plus, frankly, your background suggests capabilities that could be extremely valuable for navigating complex situations. Such as understanding institutional systems well enough to predict administrative responses to various scenarios, such as assessing risks in ways that prevent problems rather than creating them, such as strategic thinking that extends beyond immediate profits to long-term stability. Those capabilities are rare in here, and I'd be foolish not to recognize their value." Marcus appreciated the honest assessment. "You're proposing partnership based on recognition of respective skills rather than hierarchical dominance." "Exactly. I'm not asking you to work for me. I'm asking if we can work together in ways that serve both our interests." The distinction mattered significantly. Marcus recognized that Rodriguez had moved beyond simple power plays to more sophisticated understanding of collaborative advantage. "I'm willing to consider this," Marcus said carefully. "But I need clear boundaries established. I won't provide information that directly facilitates illegal activities. I won't transport contraband or participate in distribution networks. I won't compromise staff members or create security vulnerabilities that endanger people." "Fair restrictions," Rodriguez acknowledged. "So we're talking about general institutional intelligence, patterns, procedures, environmental observations, rather than specific operational support." "Correct. And I reserve right to decline any request that feels inconsistent with my principles. This only works if it remains genuinely voluntary collaboration rather than coerced compliance." Rodriguez extended his hand across the table. "Then we have foundation for partnership. Let's start small. Simple information exchanges that build trust and see where it develops from there." Marcus shook his hand firmly, recognizing that this moment marked significant shift in D-Block's power dynamics. The janitor and the crime boss had found common ground through mutual respect rather than dominance or submission. As they left the study room separately to avoid appearance of obvious alliance, Marcus reflected on the unexpected trajectory of his incarceration. He'd entered Riverbend expecting to quietly serve his time in obscurity. Instead, his capabilities had made him visible, his principles had earned respect, and his strategic thinking had created opportunities for influence he'd never sought. Derek awaited his return to their cell with barely contained curiosity. "Did you just have private meeting with Rodriguez?" Derek demanded. "Everyone's talking about it. Word is you two either made deal or you're about to get disappeared. Which is it?" Marcus settled onto his bunk with characteristic calm. "We established mutual understanding based on recognition of respective capabilities. Neither dominance nor elimination. Just acknowledgement that cooperation serves both our interests better than conflict." "You made deal with Rodriguez," Derek said, his tone mixing awe and concern. "That changes everything about your position here. You're not just guy who defended himself anymore. You're a strategic player with major connections." "I'm still the janitor serving 18 months for embezzlement," Marcus corrected gently. "But yes, my relationships within the facility have evolved beyond initial expectations." "Man, you operate on completely different level than everyone else," Derek observed. "Most people in here are just trying to survive day by day. You're playing three-dimensional chess while they're playing checkers." Marcus opened his book, offering slight smile. "I'm just someone who learned that understanding systems thoroughly creates more options than reacting emotionally to immediate pressures. That principle applies universally, whether in international security, corporate environments, or prison dynamics." Evening settled across D-Block with new awareness of shifted allegiances. Marcus Chen had transformed from overlooked janitor to central strategic figure, through combination of demonstrated capability, consistent principles, and sophisticated thinking. The question now was what he would choose to do with this unexpected influence. The system's weakness. When institutional knowledge meets strategic intelligence, even secure facilities reveal vulnerabilities. How does observed wisdom identify patterns others miss? This chapter exposes the moment when Marcus's analytical capabilities demonstrate their true value, proving that observation can be more powerful than force. Subscribe now to discover how systematic thinking transforms institutional dynamics and creates leverage beyond conventional power. Marcus's daily custodial rounds provided something few inmates possessed: comprehensive visibility across the facility's operational systems. While other prisoners remained confined to their assigned areas, Marcus moved through administrative corridors, maintenance spaces, guard stations, and common areas with institutional authorization. What appeared to be menial cleaning work functioned as sophisticated reconnaissance. 3 weeks into his partnership with Rodriguez, Marcus had compiled mental maps of patterns that revealed operational vulnerabilities. He'd observed shift change protocols, documented surveillance camera coverage gaps, noted procedural inconsistencies, and tracked staff behavioral patterns with methodical precision. But he'd shared none of this information yet, waiting to understand Rodriguez's true intentions beyond their initial agreement. That assessment accelerated when Marcus observed concerning development during morning administrative corridor maintenance through partially open office door. He overheard conversation between 2 corrections counselors discussing inmate transfer recommendations. "Rodriguez is getting transferred to administrative segregation next week," one counselor explained to her colleague. "The warden decided his influence over D-block contraband networks has become too destabilizing. 6 months in ADSEG should disrupt his operations enough to reestablish control." Marcus continued his work without obvious reaction, but his mind immediately calculated implications Rodriguez didn't know about the pending transfer, meaning his entire network faced sudden decapitation that would create power vacuum and institutional chaos. The information created ethical dilemma. Marcus could withhold what he'd learned, allowing institutional processes to proceed and eliminating his most significant alliance. Or he could warn Rodriguez, demonstrating loyalty while potentially perpetuating harmful contraband operations. He chose third option, one consistent with his principles while serving multiple interests. During afternoon recreation, Marcus requested private conversation with Rodriguez in their established neutral territory. Rodriguez arrived expecting routine intelligence exchange, but Marcus's expression suggested more significant development. "I overheard conversation in administrative offices this morning," Marcus began directly. "You're being transferred to administrative segregation next week. The warden believes removing you from general population will disrupt contraband networks sufficiently to reestablish institutional control." Rodriguez's face hardened immediately, his jaw tightening with controlled anger. 6 months in the hole. That's death sentence for everything I've built here. My crew can't maintain operations without direct oversight, and every rival faction will move to fill the vacuum. "Correct assessment," Marcus confirmed, "which means you have approximately 5 days to either prevent the transfer or prepare your operations to survive your absence." "Preventing transfer isn't realistic. Once warden makes that decision, appeal processes take weeks," Rodriguez said, his strategic mind already calculating options. "So we're talking about survival strategies for my network during extended absence." Marcus pulled out small notebook he'd begun carrying, ostensibly for tracking custodial supplies, actually for documenting observations. "I've been mapping institutional systems for 3 weeks. Let me show you what I've learned about vulnerabilities and opportunities." He opened a page filled with detailed notations: guard rotation schedules, surveillance gaps, procedural inconsistencies, communication patterns between staff members. Rodriguez studied the information with growing recognition of its sophistication. "This is operational intelligence at level I've never seen in institutional context," Rodriguez admitted. "You've documented patterns most people wouldn't notice after months of observation. How did you compile this without drawing attention?" "Janitors are invisible," Marcus explained simply. "People talk freely around custodial staff, assume we're not intelligent enough to understand significance of what we observe. That invisibility provides access to information others can't obtain." Rodriguez continued reviewing the notebook, his expression shifting from initial concern to strategic calculation. Some of these vulnerabilities could be leveraged to maintain operations during my absence. If my crew knew these patterns, they could coordinate distribution with significantly lower risk. That's one application, Marcus agreed. But I'd suggest broader thinking. Your network's primary weakness isn't logistics, it's lack of strategic leadership when you're removed. Your crew handles immediate operations competently, but doesn't think systematically about institutional dynamics or long-term sustainability. So you're suggesting what? That you take over operational leadership while I'm in ADSEG? No. I'm suggesting we establish advisory structure where I provide strategic intelligence without direct involvement in distribution activities. Your crew continues handling logistics and enforcement, their established roles. But they consult with me regarding timing, risk assessment, and adaptation to changing institutional conditions. I become strategic advisor rather than operational leader. Rodriguez considered this sophisticated proposal carefully. You'd be willing to provide ongoing consultation to my crew even though I'm not present to guarantee your safety or compensation? I'd be willing because it serves multiple interests, Marcus clarified. Your crew maintaining stable operations prevents power vacuum that would create facility-wide chaos affecting everyone's safety. Warden's strategy of disrupting networks through your removal fails. If operations continue smoothly, teaching administration that heavy-handed approaches don't achieve intended results. And frankly, having significant institutional influence, even indirect influence, provides me advantages during my remaining incarceration. You're thinking 5 moves ahead while everyone else is reacting to immediate circumstances, Rodriguez observed. This is exactly why I wanted partnership with you rather than conflict. Marcus closed his notebook carefully. But understand my conditions clearly. I'll provide strategic intelligence and risk assessment. I won't transport contraband, won't interact with corrupted staff members, won't compromise facility security in ways that endanger people. My consultation remains bounded by principles that prevent me from crossing lines I've established. Those boundaries significantly limit operational flexibility, Rodriguez noted. They also ensure I remain positioned to provide sustained support rather than getting caught and losing all utility. Would you prefer advisor who takes moderate risks and maintains effectiveness, or advisor who takes maximum risks and ends up in segregation alongside you? Rodriguez smiled with genuine appreciation. Point taken. Sustainable strategic advantage beats short-term tactical gains. They spent the next hour developing framework for Marcus's advisory role during Rodriguez's absence. Marcus would maintain his custodial routine, while making himself available for crew consultation during recreation periods. He'd provide risk assessments for proposed operations, identify new institutional vulnerabilities, and recommend adaptive strategies as circumstances evolved. Your crew needs to understand I'm not replacement for your leadership, Marcus emphasized. I'm resource they can consult, not authority they report to. That distinction prevents me from becoming target while maintaining my utility. Agreed, I'll explain the structure before transfer and establish clear protocols for how they should engage with you. As they concluded their planning session, Marcus recognized that he'd deepened his institutional influence while maintaining ethical boundaries. He wasn't participating directly in contraband distribution. He was providing information about institutional systems that happened to have application for Rodriguez's operations. The distinction mattered significantly for his own moral calculus. Victor Reeves approached Marcus later that evening, his expression suggesting awareness of recent developments. Word travels quickly in here, Reeves observed. You warned Rodriguez about his pending transfer and structured advisory relationship with his crew. That's bold strategic positioning that creates significant obligations on his part. It creates mutual benefit rather than obligations, Marcus corrected. Rodriguez's network maintaining stability serves everyone's interests during his absence. True, but you've also positioned yourself as indispensable to those operations. When Rodriguez returns from ADSEG, you'll have demonstrated value that solidifies your alliance beyond initial trust building. That's sophisticated long-term thinking. Marcus appreciated Reeves's strategic understanding. I'm curious why you're not concerned about my alliance with Rodriguez affecting our own developing relationship. Doesn't this create competing loyalties? On the contrary, Reeves replied. You helping Rodriguez navigate institutional threats demonstrates exactly the capabilities that make you valuable to broader coalition. You're proving you can identify vulnerabilities, develop strategic responses, and maintain ethical boundaries while providing substantial utility. Those qualities benefit all of us. So you view my Rodriguez partnership as evidence of my value rather than competition for my attention? I view it as confirmation that you operate at strategic level most inmates never achieve. You're building influence through demonstrated competence rather than intimidation or manipulation. That's rare enough to warrant investment and support. The conversation illuminated Marcus's unusual position. He'd become strategic asset valued by multiple factions without owing exclusive loyalty to any single group. His principles had created trust, his capabilities had demonstrated value, and his careful boundary setting had prevented him from becoming captured by any particular interest. Officer Davidson pulled Marcus aside during the following morning's custodial rounds, his expression suggesting administrative awareness of developing dynamics. "The warden asked me to check in with you," Davidson explained. "She's aware that Rodriguez will be transferred soon and wants to ensure you're not getting drawn into situations that could jeopardize your release date." Marcus continued organizing his cleaning supplies while responding. "I appreciate the concern. I've maintained clear boundaries regarding what I will and won't participate in. Those boundaries won't change regardless of institutional dynamics. Rodriguez's crew will be vulnerable during his absence. They might pressure you for support beyond what you're comfortable providing. You need to be prepared to establish firm limits." "I've already established those limits with Rodriguez directly," Marcus replied. "His crew understands I'm available for general consultation but not operational involvement. That structure protects me while providing them valuable strategic perspective." Davidson studied him thoughtfully. "You've managed to position yourself as strategic advisor without becoming direct participant in contraband operations. That's politically sophisticated navigation of extremely complex social dynamics. I've learned that clear boundaries clearly communicated prevent misunderstandings that create problems later. It's not sophisticated, just consistent application of basic principles. Basic principles that most people abandon under institutional pressures," Davidson observed. "The warden wanted me to tell you that your approach hasn't gone unnoticed. Administrative staff recognize you're managing complicated situation with unusual wisdom." Marcus appreciated the acknowledgement but remained cautious about reading too much into official approval. "I'm simply trying to complete my sentence without unnecessary complications while maintaining some dignity in difficult environment." "You're succeeding at that far better than most," Davidson said. "Just don't let success create overconfidence. Rodriguez's transfer will test whether your boundaries hold when convenient pressures increase." The warning proved prescient within days. Rodriguez's crew, specifically his second-in-command, a calculating inmate named Marcus, a coincidence that occasionally created confusion, approached Marcus during recreation with requests that tested his established limits. "We need your help with specific operational problem," Carlos explained, his tone respectful but insistent. "There's shipment coming in through compromised staff member next week. We need advice on timing and distribution approach that minimizes detection risk." Marcus recognized the request immediately exceeded his boundaries. This wasn't general strategic intelligence but direct operational consultation. "That's not something I can provide guidance on. My consultation is limited to general institutional patterns, not specific contraband logistics." "But Rodriguez said you'd provide strategic support during his absence," Carlos pressed. "This is exactly the kind of risk assessment he meant." "Rodriguez and I established clear boundaries about what strategic support includes," Marcus replied firmly. "General intelligence about surveillance patterns, shift changes, procedural vulnerabilities that I can discuss. Specific guidance about contraband operations. That crosses lines I won't cross." Carlos's frustration became visible. "So you're basically useless when we actually need help? What's the point of strategic advisor who won't advise on strategy?" "The point is maintaining my utility over time rather than losing it through single poor decision," Marcus explained patiently. "If I provide the guidance you're requesting and operations go wrong, I become implicated in ways that extend my sentence and eliminate all future value. Is short-term operational advice worth losing sustained strategic consultation?" The logic penetrated Carlos's immediate frustration, though his dissatisfaction remained obvious. "Fine. Then tell me this generally. What institutional patterns should we consider when planning time-sensitive activities requiring staff coordination?" Marcus recognized the reformulated questions stayed within his boundaries while still seeking useful intelligence. Generally speaking, midweek shift changes create temporary coordination gaps when new rotations are still establishing rhythms. Administrative attention typically focuses on weekend activities when families visit and emotions run high. Wednesday through Friday afternoons, between lunch and dinner periods, represent institutional attention valleys where procedural compliance tends to be more relaxed. Carlos absorbed this information with obvious utility. And surveillance coverage gaps? Maintenance areas, storage closets, and spaces between camera fields of view create opportunities for unobserved movement. But those gaps change quarterly when security reviews update coverage. Current gaps won't necessarily exist next month. So we should leverage known gaps quickly before they potentially change. That would be logical conclusion if someone were planning activities requiring discretion. Marcus agreed carefully. Though I'm speaking hypothetically about institutional patterns rather than advising specific applications. Carlos smiled slightly, recognizing the careful dance between consultation and deniability. You're really good at this, providing value while maintaining distance. Rodriguez chose well when he partnered with you. The exchange demonstrated Marcus's ability to navigate complex ethical boundaries while maintaining utility. He'd provided genuinely helpful intelligence without crossing into direct operational complicity, preserving his principles while building trust with Rodriguez's crew. As Rodriguez's transfer date approached, Marcus reflected on the unexpected complexity of his institutional experience. He'd entered prison expecting isolation and obscurity. Instead, his capabilities had made him central figure in facilities' power dynamics. His principles had earned respect across factions, and his strategic thinking had created influence he'd never anticipated. The janitor had become something far more significant, not through seeking power, but through consistent application of wisdom to complex systems. His transformation was complete, though his story was far from finished. The test of principles. When pressure intensifies, true character reveals itself through choices made under duress. How does wisdom maintain integrity when convenient compromises beckon? This chapter delivers the crucial moment when Marcus faces his greatest challenge, one that will define whether his principles are genuine commitments or convenient postures. Don't miss this powerful exploration of moral courage in impossible circumstances. Subscribe now to witness the decision that will determine his ultimate legacy. Rodriguez's transfer to administrative segregation occurred on Thursday morning, with bureaucratic efficiency that gave his crew minimal time for final coordination. As corrections officers escorted him from D Block, Rodriguez made brief eye contact with Marcus, silent acknowledgement of trust placed in their partnership. The power vacuum manifested immediately. By afternoon recreation period, rival factions began testing boundaries that Rodriguez's presence had previously enforced. Inmates who'd avoided contraband territories moved into previously controlled spaces, challenging the implicit agreements that had maintained operational stability. Carlos gathered Rodriguez's core crew in the law library study room, his expression communicating urgent concern. We need strategic guidance immediately. 3 different groups are moving on our distribution points, relationships with our customer base are getting poached, and corrupted staff members are receiving competing offers. Without Rodriguez's direct authority, everything's falling apart faster than expected. Marcus had anticipated this scenario, the initial chaos that followed leadership removal from established networks. The disruption is inevitable. Question is whether you respond reactively or strategically. What's strategic response to people stealing our business? One crew member demanded, his frustration visible. You don't defend territory through escalating violence that draws administrative attention, Marcus explained calmly. You defend it through demonstrating superior service, reliability, and reduced risk. Rival factions can offer contraband, but can they offer the systematic distribution networks Rodriguez spent years building? Can they provide the sophisticated coordination that prevents detection? Carlos recognized the logic immediately. You're saying we compete on operational sophistication rather than intimidation. Exactly. Your advantage isn't force. It's system efficiency developed through Rodriguez's strategic planning. Emphasize that advantage through consistent delivery, minimal drama, and lower customer risk. People will return to established networks when alternatives prove less reliable. But what about rivals who try to push us out through violence? Another crew member asked. We just accept getting muscled aside? You defend your operations without initiating conflicts that spiral beyond control. Defensive posture, rather than aggressive expansion. That keeps administrative attention focused on whoever's creating disruption, rather than on your established activities. Marcus's strategic framework provided clarity that reduced immediate panic. Rodriguez's crew began implementing the approach, maintaining their distribution points through reliable service rather than territorial aggression, allowing rivals to create their own problems through clumsy operations that drew staff attention. The strategy demonstrated effectiveness within days. A rival faction's attempt to establish new distribution network resulted in confiscated contraband and segregation sentences when their crude coordination triggered security response. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's crew continued operations with minimal disruption by following Marcus's guidance about timing, locations, and behavioral patterns that minimized detection risk. But success created new pressures. Carlos approached Marcus during Tuesday recreation period, with requests that tested every boundary Marcus had established. We have major shipment coming in Friday, Carlos explained, his tone urgent. Largest delivery Rodriguez had scheduled before his transfer, but our usual method for receiving the shipment isn't viable anymore. That staff member got transferred to different facility last week. We need new approach, and our crew doesn't have Rodriguez's relationships with corrupted staff to establish alternative access. Marcus recognized where this was heading. I can't help you establish corrupted staff relationships. That crosses every line I've drawn. I'm not asking you to corrupt anyone, Carlos clarified, but you have access to administrative areas through your custodial work. You move through spaces we never enter, interact with staff members we never see. Could you just observe whether there are vulnerabilities in receiving areas that might allow shipment access without requiring staff cooperation? The request represented sophisticated boundary testing, not asking Marcus to transport contraband, but requesting reconnaissance that would directly facilitate contraband entry. It remained technically within information-gathering boundaries, while clearly supporting specific illegal activity. Marcus felt competing pressures. His partnership with Rodriguez carried implicit obligations. The crew had trusted his guidance and achieved results. Walking away now would destroy relationships he'd carefully built and potentially create dangerous resentment. But accepting the request would compromise principles he'd consistently maintained. He'd promised himself never to provide intelligence for specific contraband operations, only general institutional patterns. This crossed that line definitively. I understand your need, Marcus said carefully. But what you're requesting requires me to conduct targeted reconnaissance for specific illegal operation. That's different from sharing general observations about institutional patterns. It moves me from strategic consultant to active participant. Carlos's frustration became evident. Rodriguez trusted you to help maintain operations during his absence. This is a critical situation. If we can't receive this shipment, we lose major revenue and credibility with external suppliers. We're asking for help that uses your position without requiring you to touch anything illegal. You're asking me to conduct operational intelligence gathering in direct support of contraband smuggling, Marcus replied firmly. I appreciate the trust Rodriguez placed in me, but I was clear about my boundaries from the beginning. Those boundaries exist precisely to prevent situations where just this once becomes regular expectation. Another crew member interjected angrily. So you'll take Rodriguez's protection, benefit from his network, provide strategic advice that helps our operations, but when we actually need something substantive, you hide behind principles? That's using us without delivering when it matters. Marcus recognized the legitimate grievance beneath the accusation. I understand your perspective, but my value to your operations depends on maintaining clear boundaries. If I start crossing lines, I become liability rather than asset. One mistake, one detection, and I'm in segregation alongside Rodriguez with zero utility to anyone. Maybe that's exactly where you belong, the crew member muttered. Maybe you're just coward hiding behind fancy words about principles. Carlos raised his hand, silencing his associate. Enough! Marcus has been clear about his limits from the start. We can't fault him for maintaining consistency. He turned to Marcus directly. But understand that this refusal has consequences. Rodriguez's crew needed you to step up when it mattered, and you chose self-preservation that changes how we view your reliability. Marcus absorbed the implicit threat without visible reaction. I accept those consequences. My boundaries exist because I believe they serve long-term interests better than compromising for short-term gains. I'm willing to lose your trust rather than violate principles that keep me effective. The conversation ended with obvious tension. Marcus had maintained his ethical boundaries, but potentially damaged his most significant institutional alliance. As Carlos and his crew departed, Marcus felt the familiar weight of difficult choices, knowing he'd acted consistently with his values while recognizing the practical costs. Officer Davidson approached shortly after, having observed the tense interaction. "Looked like difficult conversation," Davidson commented neutrally. "Rodriguez's crew putting pressure on you?" "They requested assistance beyond what I'm willing to provide," Marcus acknowledged. "I declined, which strained our working relationship." Davidson studied him thoughtfully. "That took courage. Most people in your position would find ways to justify crossing boundaries when refusing creates immediate problems. You're demonstrating commitment to principles that's rare inside these walls, or outside them, honestly." "I'm not confident courage is the right word," Marcus replied. "I'm just someone who's learned that small compromises accumulate into larger failures of character. I've made enough mistakes in my life. I'm trying not to repeat them during incarceration." "Whatever you call it, it's impressive. Warden Michaels asked me to check in with you. Actually, she's aware Rodriguez's crew is under pressure and wanted to ensure you're not getting coerced into compromising positions." "I appreciate the concern. I've maintained my boundaries thus far, and intend to continue doing so, regardless of social consequences." Davidson nodded approvingly. "Good, because those consequences might intensify. Rodriguez's crew needs to show strength during his absence, and they might view pressuring you as a way to demonstrate they won't accept resistance." The warning materialized the following day. Marcus entered his cell after morning custodial duties to find Derek unusually agitated. "Carlos's people were here while you were working," Derek reported tensely. "They went through your stuff, read your notebooks, made it clear they're watching everything you do. Said to tell you that if you're not helping Rodriguez's crew, you're working against them." Marcus examined his belongings, noting that nothing appeared taken, but everything had been deliberately disturbed. Message about vulnerability rather than theft. His notebooks remained, including the detailed institutional observations that documented facility patterns. "Did they threaten you directly?" Marcus asked Derek. "Not explicitly, but they made it clear that staying in cell with you might become uncomfortable if you don't reconsider your position. I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm just letting you know the situation's escalating." Marcus appreciated the honest warning. "I understand. If you need to request cell transfer to avoid complications, I won't take it personally." "Nah," Derek said, surprising himself with the decision. "I've watched you handle everything that's come your way with more integrity than anyone I've seen in here. I'm not abandoning you because some crew decides to play intimidation games. Besides, you taught me something about maintaining principles even when it's inconvenient. Time I practiced that myself." The unexpected solidarity reminded Marcus that his consistent choices had influenced more people than just high-profile alliances. Derek's transformation from purely self-interested survival to principled loyalty represented validation that principles could inspire others even in corrupting environments. But the pressure continued mounting. During evening recreation, Marcus found himself increasingly isolated. Inmates who'd previously sought his consultation now avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when he approached. The social network he'd carefully built was fracturing under crew pressure. Victor Reeves observed these dynamics and requested private conversation. "Carlos is making you example," Reeves explained bluntly. "He can't afford to appear weak by accepting your refusal, so he's creating social pressure to force compliance. You're being painted as unreliable ally who takes benefits without delivering when needed." "That's inaccurate characterization of our arrangement," Marcus replied. "I established clear boundaries that Rodriguez accepted. Carlos is revising those terms unilaterally." "True, but accurate doesn't matter. Only effective Carlos needs to show strength, and making you uncomfortable serves that purpose. Question is how you respond." Marcus considered his options carefully. "I could apologize, offer limited cooperation, attempt to rebuild relationships through compromise. That would reduce immediate pressure and restore some social standing. But it would also violate every principle you've maintained," Reeves finished. So you're facing fundamental choice: comfort through compromise or difficulty through consistency. I've made that choice before, Marcus said quietly. It cost me career I valued and life I'd built. But the alternative, continuing to compromise in ways that eroded who I was, would have cost even more. I won't repeat that mistake. Reeves smiled with genuine respect. Then you're about to discover whether your principles can withstand serious institutional pressure, because Carlos isn't backing down, and social isolation here is psychologically brutal. Most people break eventually, accepting small compromises that lead to larger ones until their boundaries disappear entirely. How do you maintain boundaries when everyone's pressuring you to abandon them? Marcus asked directly. You remember why you established them in the first place. You reconnect with whatever values matter more than temporary comfort, and you accept that some battles are won not through victory, but through refusing to surrender who you are. The conversation provided philosophical support, but no practical solution. Marcus remained isolated, under pressure, and facing choice between maintaining principles and recovering institutional relationships. That evening, he sat on his bunk reading Marcus Aurelius by dim cell lighting, finding particular resonance in ancient Stoic wisdom about maintaining virtue despite external pressures. You reading that philosophy stuff again? Derek asked from his lower bunk. Does it actually help with situations like this, or is it just abstract theory? Marcus considered the question thoughtfully. It helps by reminding me that my character is the only thing fully under my control. Carlos can isolate me socially. The crew can make my environment uncomfortable. Administration can restrict my privileges, but none of them can force me to abandon principles I've chosen to maintain. That remains my decision alone. So you're just gonna accept being outcast rather than compromise? I'm going to accept whatever consequences follow from maintaining integrity. That might include social isolation, lost privileges, or increased difficulty. But it won't include erosion of principles I've worked hard to establish. Derek was quiet for a moment. I don't know if I could do that. Most of us in here got convicted because we compromised principles for immediate gain. You're doing opposite, accepting immediate pain to maintain long-term integrity. That's backwards from how most people think. Perhaps, but I've lived enough years to know that small compromises compound into major failures of character. I'd rather face difficulty with intact principles than comfort with eroded values. As D-Block settled into evening quiet, Marcus reflected on the unexpected test his incarceration had become. He'd thought prison would be endurance challenge, surviving boredom, maintaining dignity, counting days until release. Instead, it had become crucible for examining whether his principles were genuine commitments or convenient postures. Tomorrow would bring continued pressure. Rodriguez's crew would escalate their campaign to force compliance. Social isolation would intensify psychological difficulty of maintaining boundaries. But Marcus had already made his fundamental choice. Whatever happened next, he would face it with intact integrity rather than compromised comfort. The janitor had discovered that true strength wasn't measured by victories over opponents. It was measured by consistency in maintaining character, despite external pressures. That discovery was worth any price. Institutional dynamics might demand. The truth revealed. When the world finally learns who someone truly was, everything changes. What happens when a carefully guarded past becomes public knowledge? This final chapter delivers the revelation that transforms our entire understanding of the janitor's journey, and truth so extraordinary it redefines everything that came before. Don't miss this powerful conclusion that proves the most profound transformations happen not through what we gain, but through what we choose to preserve. Subscribe to discover the ending no one expected. The morning brought Marcus to administrative corridor maintenance with routine that had become meditation. Repetitive motions allowing mind to process challenges while hands completed familiar work. Officer Davidson intercepted him near the records office, his expression unusually serious. Warden Michaels needs to see you immediately, Davidson said, his tone suggesting significance beyond typical administrative conversations. It's regarding inquiries about your background. Bring your custodial cart. You'll return to work after the meeting. Marcus followed Davidson to the warden's office, noting unusual presence of 2 additional people, a man and woman in professional attire that marked them as visitors from outside the facility. Their bearing suggested law enforcement or government agencies, though no badges were immediately visible. Warden Michaels gestured to a chair. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming. These are Special Agents Morrison and Chen from the FBI. They've requested this meeting regarding your incarceration and background." Marcus settled into the chair with characteristically calm composure, though his mind immediately calculated implications. Federal agents rarely visited local corrections facilities without significant reason. Agent Morrison spoke first, her tone professional and direct. "Mr. Chen, we need to discuss circumstances that led to your conviction and your decision not to contest charges despite having substantial legal defenses available." "I pleaded guilty to embezzlement charges and accepted the sentence," Marcus replied carefully. "I'm not certain what requires FBI investigation 2 months into my incarceration." "We're not investigating your conviction," Agent Chen clarified. "We're here because your presence in general population created security situation that triggered reviews of sealed portions of your pre-sentencing investigation. Those reviews revealed information requiring federal coordination with facility administration." Marcus remained silent, recognizing that response wasn't required yet. Warden Michaels leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, the sealed section of your PSI indicates you worked for 12 years as security contractor in Southeast Asia under multiple federal agencies' coordination. Your embezzlement involved international wire transfers that were actually emergency extraction payments for compromised local assets in dangerous situations." The revelation hung in the air while Marcus processed its implications. His carefully constructed narrative, the story of a failed accountant who cut corners, was disintegrating under official scrutiny. "You weren't stealing money," Agent Morrison continued. "You were using your accounting firm position to facilitate emergency payments through unofficial channels when standard agency procedures moved too slowly to protect endangered sources. When your activities drew IRS attention, you accepted criminal conviction rather than exposing classified operations or compromised assets." Marcus met their eyes directly, his expression showing carefully controlled emotion. "If that's accurate, why am I having this conversation now? I accepted conviction specifically to avoid these details becoming public. Because Rodriguez's crew investigation led to discovery of your detailed institutional observations," Warden Michaels explained. "When we reviewed your notebooks as part of security assessment, we recognized the sophistication of your operational intelligence gathering that triggered additional background reviews that revealed your sealed history." Agent Chen opened briefcase, withdrawing thick file folder. "Your service record is remarkable, Marcus. 8 years military intelligence, followed by 12 years as civilian contractor coordinating protection operations for at-risk assets in Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. You prevented 17 kidnapping attempts, disrupted multiple extortion networks targeting American manufacturing operations, and successfully extracted 43 endangered sources under extremely hazardous conditions. And then you lost someone," Agent Morrison said gently. "A local asset, a woman you'd worked with for 3 years protecting labor organizers from criminal networks. She was killed during extraction operation when your request for agency support was delayed by bureaucratic procedures. That loss caused you to walk away from contracting work entirely." Marcus's controlled expression finally showed deep pain. Memory of failure that had ended his career and reshaped his entire trajectory. Dr. Sumitra Fan. She trusted me to protect her and her organization. When I couldn't navigate agency politics quickly enough to get her the support she needed. She died because I'd convinced her to take risks she wouldn't have accepted without my assurances. The room fell quiet, acknowledging the weight of that loss. "You returned to the United States and established new identity as accountant," Agent Morrison continued. "You deliberately chose routine civilian work as form of penance, rejecting everything you'd been good at because you couldn't forgive yourself for that failure. But when former colleagues requested emergency assistance extracting compromised assets using your accounting firm's international transfer capabilities, you couldn't refuse people whose lives were endangered. So I facilitated unauthorized financial transfers through civilian channels," Marcus finished. "When the transfers drew regulatory attention, I accepted criminal charges rather than exposing classified operations or the identities of endangered assets I'd helped extract I believed prison sentence was appropriate consequence for my involvement. Warden Michaels shook her head slowly. You accepted 18 months in corrections facility for actions that saved multiple lives, because you believed you deserved punishment for the one life you couldn't save. That's extraordinary burden to carry. It's appropriate burden, Marcus replied quietly. Dr. Fan died because I convinced her to trust systems I couldn't deliver. Everything else, the people I helped later, the charges I accepted, those were attempts to balance accounts that can never truly balance. Agent Chen leaned forward. Marcus, we're here because we need to discuss your situation going forward. Your current incarceration serves no federal interests and punishes someone who sacrificed career and freedom to protect classified operations. We have authority to coordinate your immediate release through sealed proceedings that protect operational security. Marcus absorbed this information with mixture of relief and uncertainty. Release based on what justification? My conviction is legitimate under standard criminal law, regardless of underlying motivations. Release based on national security considerations requiring your continued availability for sensitive consultations, Agent Morrison explained. We've negotiated terms with the warden and prosecuting authorities. You'd be released immediately under supervised conditions that satisfy legal requirements while acknowledging your service record. And in exchange? Marcus asked, recognizing that federal coordination always included considerations. In exchange, you agree to occasional consultation on operations requiring your specialized knowledge of Southeast Asian networks and protective strategies, not active fieldwork. Just advisory support when situations arise requiring your particular expertise and relationships. Marcus considered the proposition carefully. Immediate release represented freedom he'd resigned himself to waiting 16 more months to achieve, but it also meant returning to a world he'd deliberately walked away from, reconnecting with work that reminded him of failures he'd tried to leave behind. I need time to consider this, Marcus said finally. I accepted my sentence as appropriate consequence for my actions. Circumventing that through federal intervention feels like avoiding accountability I chose to accept. The three officials exchanged glances suggesting they'd anticipated this response. Mr. Chen, Warden Michaels said gently, you've conducted yourself with extraordinary integrity during your incarceration. You've navigated complex social dynamics without compromising principles. You've influenced institutional culture positively, and you've demonstrated exactly the kind of thoughtful character that makes your continued imprisonment seem unjust. Consider whether maintaining your sentence serves any legitimate purpose beyond your own sense of requiring punishment. Marcus sat quietly, processing competing considerations. Part of him wanted to accept release immediately, escape institutional constraints, resume normal life, leave prison dynamics behind. But another part recognized that accepting federal intervention meant acknowledging that his civilian conviction had been somewhat performative, using criminal justice system for purposes it wasn't designed to serve. May I have until tomorrow to decide? Marcus requested. This is significant choice requiring careful consideration. Of course, Agent Morrison agreed. We'll remain available through tomorrow afternoon for your decision. As Marcus returned to his custodial duties, his mind wrestled with unexpected complexity. Everything had changed through revelation of his true background. He wasn't failed accountant seeking redemption. He was accomplished professional, carrying guilt for singular failure that had ended distinguished career. Derek noticed Marcus's unusual preoccupation when he returned to their cell that evening. Something happened today, Derek observed. You've got that look people get when their entire situation just shifted. Marcus settled onto his bunk, considering how much to share. The administration discovered my background before prison. It turns out my conviction was more complicated than standard embezzlement charges. Complicated how? You were spy or something? Not spy. Security contractor protecting people in dangerous international situations. I took a conviction for activities that were actually serving legitimate protective purposes because explaining the full context would have compromised operations and endangered people. Derek stared at him with dawning comprehension. So everything, the accounting job, the embezzlement charges, coming to prison, that was you accepting punishment for something you thought you deserved even though you were actually helping people? Essentially, yes. And now federal agents are offering immediate release in exchange for occasional consultation work. I'm trying to decide whether accepting that offer is appropriate, or whether I should complete my sentence as originally intended. Man, Derek said slowly, you're the only person I've ever met who'd have to think about whether to accept immediate freedom. Most people would be packed and gone before the agents finished explaining the deal. Most people didn't accept their sentence as form of penance for failure they still can't forgive themselves for. I'm not certain leaving early serves the accountability I sought through conviction. Derek was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? Watching you these past couple months changed how I think about integrity and principles. You've consistently chosen difficult right paths instead of easy wrong ones. You've maintained boundaries when compromising would have been simpler. You've demonstrated character that most people just talk about. I appreciate that perspective, Marcus replied. But, let me finish, Derek interrupted. If someone like you, someone who sacrificed career and freedom to protect other people, believes he needs to stay in prison as punishment, then you're punishing yourself for being human. Dr. Fan's death wasn't your fault unless you believe protecting activists from criminal networks should never involve any risk. You can't guarantee perfect outcomes in dangerous work. The words resonated with arguments Marcus had rejected for years. Attempts by colleagues and therapists to contextualize his perceived failure within broader operational realities, but hearing them from cellmate who'd witnessed his daily choices and struggles carried unexpected weight. You're suggesting my continued incarceration serves no legitimate purpose beyond self-flagellation, Marcus summarized. I'm suggesting that maybe the reason you've maintained such strong principles in here is because you're actually a good person who made one decision with tragic outcome and then spent years punishing yourself disproportionately. Maybe accepting release isn't avoiding accountability. Maybe it's accepting reality that you've already paid more than you owed. Marcus spent the night processing Derek's arguments alongside his own long-held beliefs about appropriate consequences. By morning, clarity had emerged. Not certainty, but considered decision based on honest assessment of motivations and outcomes. He requested meeting with Agents Morrison and Chen and Warden Michaels. I've decided to accept your offer, Marcus announced. Not because I believe I don't deserve punishment, but because I recognize that continuing incarceration serves primarily psychological need for penance rather than legitimate accountability. If my experience and knowledge can help protect people in dangerous situations, refusing that opportunity to maintain symbolic punishment seems itself irresponsible. Agent Morrison nodded approvingly. That's wise decision, Marcus. We'll begin processing your release immediately. You should be out of custody within 48 hours. I have one request, Marcus added. Before I leave, I'd like to address D-Block's general population. Explain my background and my departure. I've influenced dynamics here significantly, and I believe I owe honest explanation rather than simply disappearing. Warden Michaels considered this unusual request. That's unprecedented. We typically don't allow inmates to address general population, especially regarding sealed background information. I understand the concerns, but the inmates I've worked with deserve to know who I actually was and why my advice proved useful. Otherwise, my sudden departure feeds speculation and conspiracy theories that could create their own problems. After consultation, the warden agreed to supervised common area gathering where Marcus could address interested inmates. 2 days later, over 70 prisoners assembled for what they'd been told was important institutional announcement. Marcus stood before them with characteristic calm, his custodial uniform creating strange contrast with the sophisticated presentation he was about to deliver. Many of you have worked with me or observed me these past 3 months, Marcus began. You've wondered about my background, questioned why accountant moved like trained operative, speculated about my real history. Today I'm authorized to provide honest explanation before my release. The word release generated immediate reactions: surprise, speculation, resentment about perceived preferential treatment. I'm not typical inmate who embezzled money from legitimate business, Marcus continued. I worked for 12 years as security contractor in Southeast Asia, protecting people in dangerous situations. Labor organizers, corporate assets, journalists, activists. I lost someone I'd promised to protect when support systems I trusted failed her. That failure caused me to walk away from contracting work entirely. He paused, letting this foundation settle. When I returned to civilian life, I tried to build normal career as accountant. But when former colleagues needed emergency assistance extracting endangered people, I used my position to facilitate unauthorized financial transfers through channels that wouldn't expose classified operations. I accepted criminal conviction rather than revealing details that could endanger others. The common area remained unusually quiet, inmates processing revelation that explained months of observed inconsistencies. Federal authorities have offered my release in exchange for occasional consultation on protective operations. I've accepted because refusing would serve only my personal need for continued self-punishment rather than legitimate accountability. I'm sharing this because you deserve to understand who provided strategic advice and why that advice proved useful. Rodriguez, newly returned from administrative segregation specifically for this gathering, spoke from his position near the front. So the janitor was actually a professional operator with government connections. That explains everything about how you handled my crew and navigated institutional dynamics. Question is, what does this mean for people you developed relationships with here? It means my advice was informed by genuine operational experience rather than abstract theory, Marcus replied. It means boundaries I maintained protected me because I understood consequences of crossing lines I'd seen people cross before. And it means that despite everything, I tried to help people navigate difficult environment with wisdom earned through both successes and failures. Victor Reeves raised his hand. Will you maintain any connection to people here after release? Or does freedom mean cutting ties with institutional complications? Marcus considered this carefully. I can't maintain direct relationships that could compromise your situations or mine. But I've learned from each of you lessons about resilience, adaptation, and maintaining humanity in dehumanizing circumstances. Those lessons will remain part of who I am, regardless of where I am. The gathering concluded with unusual atmosphere, not celebration exactly, but acknowledgement of shared experience that transcended typical institutional dynamics. Inmates who'd worked with Marcus understood now why his strategic thinking proved sophisticated, why his defensive capabilities exceeded normal ranges, why his analytical frameworks identified patterns others missed. Derek accompanied Marcus back to their cell for final possessions gathering. So this is it, Derek said, his tone mixing happiness for Marcus's release with sadness about losing cellmate who'd influenced him significantly. You're going back to normal world while I've got 3 more years in here. 3 years you'll navigate with more wisdom than you had 3 months ago, Marcus replied, carefully folding his spare uniform. You've already started making different choices, thinking more strategically, maintaining principles even when inconvenient. That transformation continues regardless of my presence. Will you stay in touch? I know it's complicated with you being released and me still inside, but I'll write when I can, Marcus promised. Not frequently, because regular correspondence could create complications for both of us, but I won't forget the person who stood with me when social pressure made that choice difficult. The next morning brought Marcus's release processing with efficient bureaucracy that marked transition from institutional resident to returning citizen. As he changed from prison uniform to civilian clothes provided by federal authorities, Officer Davidson appeared for final conversation. You've been an unusual case, Mr. Chen, Davidson observed. Most inmates either struggle desperately or become hardened institutionally. You somehow maintain dignity while influencing facility culture positively. That's rare accomplishment. I had advantages most inmates don't, Marcus replied honestly. Background that prepared me for navigating complex social dynamics, principles refined through prior failures, and federal intervention that cut short my sentence. I don't claim exceptional virtue, just particular circumstances that allowed me to navigate incarceration differently. Still, Davidson insisted, you could have used those advantages purely for self-interest. Instead, you influenced people toward better thinking while maintaining your own integrity. That matters. Marcus stepped through the final security checkpoint into civilian waiting area, where Agents Morrison and Chen awaited. The heavy doors closed behind him with the same finality they'd carried upon his entrance, but this time marking liberation rather than confinement. Welcome back to the world, Agent Morrison said, gesturing toward exit. We have debriefings scheduled for next week to discuss consultation arrangements, but for now you're free to begin rebuilding your civilian life. As Marcus walked into afternoon sunlight, first uncontrolled outdoor experience in 3 months, he reflected on unexpected transformation his incarceration had produced. He'd entered prison believing he deserved punishment for failures that haunted him. He'd left having rediscovered purpose through helping others navigate their own challenging circumstances. Dr. Fan's death remained permanent loss that no amount of subsequent service could erase. But Marcus recognized now that honoring her memory meant continuing to protect people in vulnerable situations, not through endless self-punishment, but through applying lessons learned from both his successes and his singular devastating failure. The janitor had been revealed as something far more complex. Professional operator carrying guilt while maintaining integrity, strategic thinker helping others navigate impossible circumstances, human being learning that redemption emerges not through perfect outcomes, but through consistent commitment to principles worth preserving. 3 months earlier, Marcus Chen had walked into Riverbend Correctional Facility as man seeking penance through isolation. He walked out as person who'd rediscovered that his capabilities and experience still held value, not despite his failures, but informed by them. The transformation was complete, though the journey of integrating past experiences with present responsibilities was just beginning. Some stories end with revelation of secret identities. This one ended with recognition that true identity emerges through choices made under pressure rather than through titles, positions, or professional accomplishments. Marcus Chen, security contractor, accountant, inmate, janitor, strategic advisor, was ultimately someone who'd learned that maintaining integrity in impossible circumstances required the same courage whether protecting endangered activists in Southeast Asia or advising inmates navigating prison dynamics. That consistency of character proved more valuable than any reputation, more powerful than any position, and more redemptive than any penance. The janitor's true identity had been revealed. It was simply someone committed to helping others survive while maintaining his own humanity, a commitment that transcended any single role or circumstance, and that commitment would guide him forward, whatever challenges emerged in the freedom he'd finally accepted. The end. Thank you for joining Marcus's journey from overlooked custodian to revealed professional. From man seeking punishment to person rediscovering purpose. His story reminds us that true strength emerges not through avoiding failure, but through maintaining principles despite our failures. Subscribe to discover more stories of unexpected resilience and transformative character that challenge conventional understanding of power, identity, and redemption.